We're all hydrated, all good to go.
The irony is I'm like, I don't think I could ever be fully hydrated. And then I have to go to the bathroom all the time.
There we are. Yeah.
So it's like,
But at least you don't walk around with a gallon container of water.
I refuse to be one of those.
Right.
No, it's wild. Okay. So, I do. So I listen to these podcasts all the time because, of course, we do them and then I edit them and then we listen to it.
Right,
and I have to say, I do find it slightly amusing in myself how much I just laugh when there's. I just am having such a good time. It's hard not to.
You see those personal tics. Yes,
that's right. I'm like, if nothing else, I'm leaving behind a record of he really enjoyed what he was doing.
Yes,
so I feel good about it. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So as we kind of get going today, I thought for today's cold open, I want to do something a little bit different. I think just kind of give another shout out to just, again, this amazing growing community of listeners. And
yes, yeah.
I don't want to use the term fans, but if you so identify as one, we'll take it. But it has been, we talked about this a little bit before. I forget which episode it was when we kind of went through our top 10 countries. And
that's right. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
And it has just been an incredible ride to feel this wave of support. But also, and the reason we're just taking a moment to sort of call it out is we've been, it's humble brag, if you will, right? I feel like
I'm glad you're doing this. Yes.
I feel like it's one of those moments where we're so bogged down with time because we're receiving so many listener mail.
This is because nobody can see. You've just got one email on your computer in front of you. We're so bogged down with this.
Right? We don't need to get into my efficiency, right? If one message bogs me down, well, so be it.
Isn't this the art of PR?
That's right. But in all seriousness, I thought it would be fun just to take a moment and just to again say thank you because, we have been getting a listener mail, for lack of a better term. Like, it would be kind of fun to pull a stunt where we have like a big mail bag filled with like blank envelopes or whatever, or a stack.
Go back to 1985.
Yeah, bring in back up the truck. We need to bring in the mail, the listener mail. But it has been incredible because people have been reaching out sort of in various ad hoc ways. But also, I think this would be a good opportunity to just kind of also put out there for people who are either have been listening with us since the beginning, or people who are just finding us kind of just brand new, giving them a little bit of different ways they can get in touch with us as well, because we are completely open to getting feedback and stuff from our listeners and to,
absolutely.
I think we both have thick skins, so,
it's grown thicker over the years, but actually seriously, any sort of connection, feedback is useful.
Yeah, it's amazing. And, we're on this, again, it's been a wonderful journey and we're on this pathway and it's been so much fun getting to connect to new people and new, just new ideas that are kind of surfacing out of that as well. So I do want to just take a moment. There's a whole bunch of different ways you can sort of interact with us, and through Modem Futura, and by extension, of course, our home, the Future of Being Human initiative here at Arizona State University. One, you can certainly leave us a rating and or review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever it is that you get your stuff, because we see that.
It makes us feel really good. But also it signals to other people that this is something worth listening to.
It is. And I was reminded of that this morning. So one part of my morning routine is I tend to listen to, I hope I don't trigger anything here. I listen to Apple Podcast, like the news. They have like a little news bulletin. And even there, I was reminded that they call out that is one of the best ways for new listeners to find shows is through those ratings and reviews, because it helps, all the mechanisms for however these platforms are serving up new content. Those ratings and reviews help new listeners and such.
And it's actually really easy, especially on, in fact, actually Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you just want to leave us a rating, it's just click the star.
Yeah, just click a star.
Yep.
5 is better than 1, but leave that to you.
Be honest, but we like 5.
That's true. That's true. Let's be honest.
And I was going to say, I was hesitating to call out a family member who was really authentic here with one of my things and gave me a 4-star rating.
Oh my God. There's always room for improvement, right? You're like, oh, that's, also, if you have only been listening, maybe you're not familiar, we do have a new and growing along with us. We have a YouTube channel.
Yes.
Same call. It's at Modem Futura on YouTube. So we post, the video recordings that we do.
That's where you actually get to see us.
You get to see us. You get to see me use air quotes all the time on an audio medium, things like that. But we, through YouTube, we post the actual
Shorts,
the podcast.
Yes.
Yeah, there's 3 things right now, and there will be more. But at present, you can listen to the audio on YouTube because apparently that's a new thing, which I was surprised to learn that a huge number of, I'm going to get so it's not, was it Gen Zs? That's the younger,
I think there's one after that. I've lost count of what comes after
It starts
Z.
all over again, right? It has to go to alpha.
Double A,
right?
no, it isn't double A, but
double Z, double A, whatever, whoever, anyone who's, it's like, but apparently the younger demographic now are using YouTube of all places to listen to audio. Instead of I think people in my, I grew up when YouTube didn't exist, and then it came on, and there was a lot of push to watch like music videos and listen to music through video. Yeah. But now there's a lot of people listening to podcasts on YouTube, so it is there in pure audio format. But we also have the pure video version as well. So please, if you don't mind, please go watch to make all the effort of all these cameras worth it. But yeah, of course, you can interact with us, follow us, you can leave comments, you can interact with us on YouTube that way. We have if you want to go old school, we have an email address. Right. It is hello@modemfutura.com. So if you are so inclined to,
highly memorable.
Just hello@modemfutura.com. You can leave us an email there, which is, of course, we'll get that. And then individually, you can reach us on LinkedIn. Yep. Of course, I think in our show notes, our LinkedIn,
both there,
our tags are there. Yep. But you can search just Andrew Maynard, Sean Leahy. You can find us on LinkedIn there. And of course, you can find us at our home of Future of Being Human initiative, which is just
futureofbeinghuman.asu.edu, and everything is there.
Yep. And we're incredibly searchable. So if you use Modem Futura, any of our names, ASU, Future Being Human, Futures, Podcast, you name it.
I would say, a few months ago, we might have said Google us, but now I think it's ChatGPT us. Yeah, or whatever your flavor of AI is.
That's right. We've proven that by the, we talk about something on a Tuesday, or we release our podcast on a Tuesday.
ChatGPT knows by Wednesday.
By Wednesday, we're in there. So that's, that's an amazing feat. So, yes, you can Google us if that's still your pathway, or like Andrew said, hit ChatGPT or Perplexity, or I haven't tried the new Gemini. The new Gemini 2?
It's good. It hallucinates, but it's good.
Yeah, they all do, right?
Or even Grok. I haven't seen whether Grok must know about us, but whether you want to go that way, I don't know.
Oh, geez.
It's actually pretty impressive, I must confess. That's the latest version.
Yeah, well, I think full stop. I think one thing that is incredibly impressive. So we just dropped an episode. By the time this one airs, it'll be 2 weeks ago, of where we took a break. We tried to take a break from AI.
Right.
And a special shout out to one of our major listeners, Jim Dunnigan. He called us out on it. He's like, you didn't talk about AI too much until you did. Right. We did pretty good.
We actually thought we did very well.
I listened back to it and I'm like, because again, I think that's one of the challenges right now is what in the technology sphere, what can you talk about that does not touch?
I know.
Even if it's just kind of rubbing elbows, right? There's AI, whatever, intersection, crossbreeding, whatever. There's almost no way to escape, even just because of the marketing hype, right? If everything's attached to AI sticker to it or something, I feel like. But yeah. So anyway, before we'll take a pause here in just a second. We'll kick off because I think I've got a fun show for us today to sort of again with my theme of going back to go forward,
which I love, by the way.
And in this one, I've talked about this one in fits and starts. I think many different times, but I think today we'll give this a whole some real attention. We'll use it as a framework to talk about the crazy things that are happening right now with all of these emerging technologies, because this is the time where we need, in some ways, a lens to just keep our heads about all of these different things rolling, because it is at times overwhelming because the speed is coming so fast. So we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back with the rest of the show.
Initializing waveform. Modulating signals for transmission. exploring the possible, probable, and preferable futures.
Welcome to Modem Futura. As probably, I cannot take a break and not laugh. I don't know. It brings me so much joy. Well, anyway, for those of you who are joining us, welcome back. And if you're new to the show, I'm Sean Leahy, and I'm sitting across the table from me. It's
Andrew Maynard.
And that means this is Modem Futura, the show that explores the intersection of technology, society, and the possible, probable, and preferable futures, asking deep questions like what will it mean to be human in the future? And I think that's a great, even just that alone is a great sort of like tee off or kick off or insert sport metaphor of your choice there. So I've talked at length at times, again, about little parts when we've been talking about framing AI or other pieces of technology, especially emerging technology. You've heard me reference this this Neil Postman speech that was delivered. So Neil Postman, of course, there's a lot to go in. So I think I'm going to attempt to throw out a show title here. The Postman always rings twice. Yeah, I think it's not the 1946 crime, noir film.
After all of that build up in the cold open about sort of, follow us, give us a rating, like us, and then everybody rolls their eyes and thinks, just can't do this.
Yeah, well, You don't come here for the comedy, right? Yes. You don't come here for the comedy. I need to work on my type 15 for the comedy shack or whatever it is. But so, again, this idea of kind of revisiting this influential talk from Neil Postman that was titled 5 Things We Need to Know About Technological Change.
Yes.
Very aptly named. It was delivered I almost have it to the 27 years ago, almost to the date. We're about a month early. March 28th, 1998 is when this was given. I think it was delivered somewhere at a conference in Colorado. And essentially, at that time, so rewinding, right? So 1998, what was happening in the tech world, right? There was the Y2K bug was
it was on the horizon. I guess it was a couple of years sort of forward from there before we got to the year 2000. But yeah, definitely people were wringing their hands over that.
Yeah, and like in the educational technology space, this was a time too where online courses, online programs, things were real. So basically, educational elements mixed with the internet was really kicking off.
Yeah.
In fact, I think 1998. Where would that have put me? I think it was about the time I took my first online course. I was in high school.
Oh wow! Right.
And took my first online course. I took a physics course online. It was like the first one I ever took. It was.
You're aging yourself here.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That's right. I don't care.
I was running research teams in 1998.
I will say. I mean, everyone might have their own opinions about this, and that's fine. But mine is one that matters. And I had the best graduation year because I graduated in the year 2000.
Okay,
and that's pretty cool.
Nice. Yes.
So I had the letter jacket had 00. I'm like, good luck with that one.
Yeah.
So there are lots of things changing. So we're coming onto the internet age, basically.
Yes. Yeah.
Right around here, the .com bubble has not happened yet. Things
must have been just on the cusp of all of that.
Yeah. And I think that's again, going back, I would assume that that's probably one of the things that really was sort of preempted this talk, right? Is the hype machine at the time was in full swing, which is,
Although I remember going back to, it must have been actually 1998 when I was visiting the States, having conversations over lunch with people saying, what is this internet thing?
Yeah.
What can you really do with this other than utterly trivial things? So I was a skeptic in 1998.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's fine. Oh man, you're just triggered so many. So speaking of school, right? So I have to go back. I remember I have a very fond nostalgia memory of this. of being in middle school at the time, listening to Channel 1 News, which was this like TV satellite broadcast that they would do. It was like news, it was like CNN for kids or whatever. And they would talk about the information superhighway and getting all excited about it, right? And so for the longest time, it was like, oh yeah, people would say the internet, you mean the information superhighway?
Right.
As this precocious little child,
and the World Wide Web.
Yeah. Which, like the WW, which I just had to laugh because someone was just talking about that today. That the number of syllables in WWW, like it's like
right. It's easier to say World Wide Web.
It is. It's shorter to say World Wide Web than it is to say WWW.
Right.
But yeah, and again, it's at that time, right? So this early squishy space before there was a real economic or commercial proof of concept, I guess, whatever, for the internet was before people realized you could make a lot of money on it. Yes. So, so it was like this, this sort of.
And I've just actually got to throw in there because this so parallels where we are with AI at the moment. I mean, AI is going 1,000 times the speed of what we saw with the internet. But already you're having these conversations where people are saying, well, what can you do with AI? It's not making any money. Everybody's sort of hyping it up. But what can you really do with it?
Yeah.
And I think we're going to have the same thing play out where we're suddenly going to realize that all of this investment is just going to change everything. It's just that it's not that easy to see it in the moment.
Yeah. Well, I would argue it never is. I mean, we talked about this before with part of the possibility space is that's exactly the challenge is why it takes in some ways, right? It takes almost like a training or a discipline to be a little even keel, right? What's the quote? Here we go. Here's Sean butchering another quote. We in terms of how humans look at technological change in general in trying to predict whether something's going to make a splash is that we over-predict its impact in the short term and under-predict its impact in the long term.
Yes.
I think that's roughly right.
Like that's the essence of it, yes.
This is a danger if I don't write it down. I'm like, let me try this one.
Yes,
and I think that's very accurate. I think that was true with the internet. I think it was true with media, like in terms of digital media, television, radio. I mean, I think we have a history of these things of not really understanding the depth of transformational power these technologies.
And it's a very human thing. I mean, it's the way our brains are wired. It is very, very hard without discipline to understand sort of how to look beyond the immediate hype to what actually might potentially happen in the future.
Yeah. And I think, we've spent some time talking about this too, is that I would even argue sometimes there's a difficulty of trying to hold these two things in mind at the same time of, what could it do? What are the possibilities in this space? But then also the pragmatic, but I got to get something done today, or it's costing me money. What am I getting for this?
That's it. Yes.
And and sometimes those two don't sit well together because they, But yeah, I think it's a real interesting.
Yeah. So as we get into this, I'm also curious to know whether the debates around genetically modified organisms feed into this, because that was a huge thing at the time as well. The backlash against GMOs and Monsanto genetically engineering crops.
Dolly the sheep was roughly around the same time.
So you've got cloning as well. So you've got a whole bunch of things happening, and actually quite a big public backlash against what people were thinking of as inappropriate use of science and technology.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's really interesting. I hadn't made that connection, but you're right. Because Dolly, I remember that was.
Yeah. So Dolly, goodness me, I should have this at the tip of my fingertips. You're
I have the interwebs. Right. I'm going to use the technology right now.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah. And I'm a little embarrassed because I've written about Dolly the sheep, first cloned
let's see.
animal.
1996?
Yes, it was further ago than you might imagine.
Yeah, died 2003.
That's right, yes.
Okay.
Yep. And actually lived a healthy life.
Yeah.
But yes, so you're talking about this era where you've got cloning, you've got the internet, you've got .com just coming along, you've got fears about Y2K, you've got serious worries about frankenfood and genetically modified organisms and how they're going to destroy life as we know it. Yes. Yep. So they were interesting times when it comes to tech innovation. And we're also at that point just on the cusp of the explosion of interest in nanotechnology. So this has actually been bubbling along since the 1980s, but it was in the late 1990s that people began to really think seriously about how engineering at this really small scale can transform the world. So a lot of factors coming together at that point.
Yeah. Oh, I had not put any of this down, but I'm like, and again, this is one of the, I feel like I've fallen into this trap where like, this was only 27, 25 years ago.
Yes.
But yet I'm like, oh, right. Cause isn't this right around the same time? Isn't that when like carbon nanotubes were like,
oh yeah. It was Carbon 60, the C60 Buckminster Fullerene, where a bunch of folks got the Nobel Prize for their work on that a few years later. And then that led to carbon nanotubes, and that was all part of the nanotechnology, inverted commas here, revolution.
Yeah.
So there was a lot going on. Actually, looking back, it's amazing that it's actually not that long ago, only 20-odd years ago. But at the same time, I have this deep nostalgia for a period of time where at the time we thought it was complex, but it seems really simple looking back compared to where we are now.
Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking too, like all of a sudden you've triggered like this floodgate of things. Because I'm like, wasn't there a Michael Crichton novel, Prey?
Yeah, so that was early 2000s.
Okay, but still.
So that's another episode. I'm talking about hype and fear and nanotechnology, because I was working in the federal government there. I have stories.
Oh my God! Now that's a hook, right? So you have to make sure you subscribe and join or whatever, so you don't miss that. Because also, I'm just thinking about that too. We'll have to save this for another episode, but also the work that he was doing at the intersection, because you have, of course, Jurassic Park with the nod to cloning and raising a lot of these questions that we still use today about just because you can, should you?
Yes.
Right? So, I mean, of course, it's much more entertaining when it's a 60-foot tall Tyrannosaurus Rex,
right.
running rampage.
But yeah, Michael Crichton was an interesting person. I don't think I would have liked him if I'd met him. And you read some of his writings, I don't like the way he depicts people, but he was asking these really deep questions about what if with a new technology and what if things go badly wrong? What are we going to do about it? I mean, Andromeda Strain, the Congo, absolute classic,
right? Sphere. That's a mind bendy. That's so much fun.
Yep.
Wow. I was not expecting this like overwhelming flood of 90s, early 2000 nostalgia.
Let's see whether we can get back on track.
Oh my goodness.
But all of this feeds into the conversation, I think.
I think it does, because I think, again, so now I think that actually does a really good job of painting the picture of where this talk came from, right? And because again, I think you have, just like we see today, you have people on, I'll use that sort of dispersion of people, the Zoomers, the Bloomers, the Gloomers, and the Doomers from Reid Hoffman's book, right? Which I still haven't read. I ordered it, but I haven't read it yet. But I like that framework because I
thought you were going to say you had the ChatGPT summary, which is good enough.
Well,
sorry, Reid.
There is that, right? But I do like that spread because it helps paint a picture of where people fall into this category. But again, just like back 25 plus 27 years ago, that's very prescient today. Where same thing, right? These technologies, you have people who are like, yes, develop at all costs, and then from that's one side of the spectrum all the way to the other, which is let's put our hairs on fire. It's this existential crisis. It's going to destroy everything as we know it. And I think that's where, again, noting that sort of turmoil is also kind of where this talk came into play.
Right, yes,
again, if anyone's out there who actually was there or knows more depth about when it happened, I would love to hear from that. And you have those ways of connecting with us. You can even leave us like an audio message or something too.
And if you've forgotten, just rewind.
That's right. We'll revisit it at the end. You got to stay to the very end to get it. Yes. But And for those who aren't familiar, again, go to ChatGPT, go to your Google of who Neil Postman was. But essentially, he was an American educator, media theorist, cultural critic. He talked a lot about technology, education, and the role media was playing in society, sort of famously with a very critical lens on it. Was very much, some of his very popular books, one's called Amusing Ourselves to Death and Techopoly, the surrender of culture to technology. So if the title doesn't tip off the hand here.
So this is so amusing. You could be writing these books now, and I think they'd be bestsellers.
Yeah, or just change media to AI, and there you go.
There
you
we
got
are, yes.
Number one bestseller right there. So he came from this point of like technology isn't always the best and greatest thing. We need to, and, I would say if we use that sort of stratified categories, I would say he's probably a gloomer in that, where it's like recognizing there's value, but being one to put the brakes on and say, well, let's think about this. Let's be careful. And let's not lose what we have. So anyway, the talk he gave, the 5 things we need to know about technological change, rather, and it basically explores how these new technologic advances or innovations, they bring profound, multifaceted effects across society. That it's basically a double-edged sword. It's sort of like, the distill it to down is basically, it's a double-edged sword. It brings a lot of amazing stuff with it, but also harms. Right, yes. Right? Yep. That it has inherent costs, biases, but also transformative effects. And we'll kind of go through these. And so he kind of breaks his speech down into 5 parts. And I thought, hey, let's do that. Okay. We'll break it down in 5 parts. So essentially, the first piece here I think we can talk about is this idea of, with all new technological innovations, there comes a trade-off. Yes. I think he puts it as it's a Faustian bargain. And so if we think about this like in the context of artificial intelligence, there's been no shortage of these conversations. Let's say, again, what are we getting? And what are we giving up?
Yes. Exactly. Yes.
And I think that's a challenging one. And I think before we've spent on this podcast, we've talked a lot recently too about what part of that creative or human agency are we at risk of diminishing or losing that part of ourselves?
And of course, the thing that I think is so important about this question and fascinates me is that if you don't have the conversation about what we might be giving up, it's very easy to miss that. So an example of that, people are beginning to ask questions around whether we're losing any sense of critical thought and critical reasoning while using AI. And it's complex because as I've written, there's evidence that if you're already a critical thinker and a creative thinker, using artificial intelligence enhances that. You become more creative, more critical. But there's also this fear that if you don't have those abilities to start with, you are effectively depressing them. Especially when you get the thought of deploying generative AI, say, in K through 12, in education, especially at a younger age. Before students have actually developed those critical skills, are we effectively, in using AI and thinking that we're accelerating their education, preventing them from developing those mental muscles that they need to thrive in the world?
I think that's a great example because, in fact, some colleagues and I, we were talking about this last night on a call. We were working on a writing thing or whatever, but we're talking about exactly that. Like over time, like right now, you could argue, we live in this weird, squishy, transitional space of when we didn't have tools like this and when they will become as common as any, as ubiquitous and as common as having just like a smartphone or whatever. But that was kind of it. It was like right now, looking at even some of the research that is showing, experts in a system getting these tools, it's like the power of human plus, right?
Right. Yes.
But because, and we talked about this before too. I mean, even going back to the dissertation that you had, ChatGPT Pro Deep Research, right? It's full of mistakes. It can't do citations well. These are things that we look at with this expert lens. You're like, that's nice try. That's garbage. Try better, GPT. But we know that, okay, well, we need to fix that because that's not okay. But that was exactly to the point.
But that's a skill that we've learned without
the hard way, right?
Yes.
And that's the question is like, if you're starting, let's say you're starting, middle school right now with aims of going on to a PhD. By the time will you still have that skill set yourself to be able to challenge what comes back to you?
And how do you ensure that people actually develop and maintain those? Can you do it while they use AI, or do we need AI-free zones? And I'm conflicted on this. And so I'm sure everybody has got their own examples, but I'll just use one. So growing up studying physics, back in the 1980s, I learned the power of graphing out stuff. You collect data and you plot it out by hand on graph paper.
Yep.
You physically do that. And apart from the fact that there's something absolutely beautiful about high-end graph paper, just getting me waxing lyrical here, that process of physically doing it made sure you understood the data, you understood the relationships between the axes of the data you're plotting, you understood intuitively what relationships were and what patterns were that you were seeing. As soon as you could do that by hand, you then had the faculties and the skills to use computers to do the analysis.
Yep.
But if you went straight, I always felt if I went straight to the computer, I failed to intuitively understand what I was doing.
Yeah.
And yet these days, nobody plots anything out by hand. So I've got to ask myself, is that just a little bit of nostalgia that I'm holding on to, or did we lose something important? And is there anything we can learn from that when we begin to look at AI? And it may be that I'm just holding on to a nostalgic view of critical thinking.
Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe. Yeah. But also, I mean, again, I think I put my lens of 1998 on too. And this is, again, using computers in school to type your paper, right? Like, do you need to learn how to spell? Do you need to learn how to write cursive, or these kind of things? But even today, another example I would throw into that is something like a creative medium like photography, right?
Yes.
So if you go through I'll say the old school, here I am using air quotes. You gotta watch YouTube to see these. But going through the traditional process of learning, again, how to master exposure with shutter speed and aperture and film speed and developing, like you learn this craft so that when you migrate or switch to digital platforms, you understand what's happening and how to interpret what you're getting so that you can control it.
Very much the case of you need to learn the rules so you understand how to break them creatively.
That's it. Exactly. Yep. And now, enter in computational photography that most smartphones all have, and they're incredibly advanced, but require very little input on the photographer's perspective to the point where you can just hold it up and it'll get you some amazing, capture amazing images. And so that's always, I struggled with this when I used to teach a lot of photography classes too, which is, are we losing something? If all you're starting with is the latest and greatest, and do you understand what's actually happening?
Yep.
Which is, most of them, I will say most of them loved it. Maybe a few didn't. But at the beginning of a class, they would all go through an analog experiment to at least as best we could within the time frame of an academic course, right? To give you that foundational experience, knowing that, okay, you'll do this and then we'll move on. But,
and then of course so there are so many sort of points of tension here with AI, but this extends to the idea of the very nature of being human. What is it that makes us uniquely us? What is it that makes us feel as if we have value? And is there a danger in giving away a lot of stuff to really powerful AI that we're losing a bit of ourselves? I seriously don't know the answer. And I think it's complex, but I would say that if we're not actively thinking about this and having these conversations, if we just ignore it altogether, there's a really high chance that we will end up giving something away of ourselves that is very hard to claw back.
I agree. And I think, this is a space too where you can see this idea of this Faustian bargain, right? This deal with the devil. But you can see people who have sort of polar opposite views of this. This is a great place to glom onto. But I think the reality is you can take this in micro doses in your own life, right?
I'm now going to use that. I am microdosing on AI.
I'm microdosing the way
I'm getting my stack just right.
Hey man, if it's not just right, it's either underwhelming or you are.
A little bit of perplexity. I'm going to put a bit of ChatGPT on there, a bit of DeepSeek.
Oh my gosh. I like that. But where I was going to go with that was you can look at this you can take things that are considered infrastructure today. And I was reminded of this not that long ago. All of my, first of all, if we talk about banking, for example, right? We have all the modern conveniences of modern banking where everything is digital and blah, blah, blah. Which, always on the periphery, there's this thought of, I heard somebody recently say that every month they print out their statements because they're like, well, how do I know next month those bits just don't go to zero?
And I know somebody who does that.
And like, and they're like, well, what is that going to do? You're going to go to the bank and you're like, it said last month I had, a gazillion dollars and now it says zero. Yeah. But there's no actual physical monies in a bank for you. But it's related to that. And it's like, so we have all these digital conveniences, right? And I don't know about you, Andrew, but I never carry cash. Like I don't. I think if I look in my wallet, I'm pretty sure there's a couple euros in there from the last time I was in.
So actually, I think I have about 3 currencies in my wallet, and I force myself every sort of 6 to 12 months of getting more money out, which I never spend.
Yeah, no, I never. Like when I travel, that's what it's from.
Right.
Like probably the last time I was on a trip, and it's just what's left over. But I never spend cash. Like I always am used. But I was reminded again of this fragility of, got new credit cards expire. And again, right, I recognize the privilege and affordances here. I've got them digitally on my phone and on my watch. So like when I go places, I don't even have to do the historical act of removing my wallet from my pants. I can just tap with my watch. Right. But credit cards expired. They sent me new ones. They just sat there on my desk, right? So I forgot to update things, and I'm out somewhere, and I'm like, "Oh, sure. Did you decline?
Doesn't work. Yes.
Did you decline?" I'm like, "Uh-oh!" And right a minute, it was like all this luxury and this feeling like you're in this modern world collapsed into I have absolutely no way of paying for anything.
Right, you're suddenly isolated. Yep.
And I'm like, and because of this, I'm like, I don't even know. I couldn't even get to like a cash point or an ATM. Like I'm like, I at this moment, I was standing there just befuddled. I'm like, I have no access to my own money.
And again, it just speaks to the fragility of the infrastructure we're building. And again, this, I think, is part of the trade-off. You have an incredible infrastructure of convenience, but when it goes wrong, it goes seriously wrong. I had a similar experience with WhatsApp recently, which I used to communicate with family between here and the UK.
Absolutely.
And I opened it up to speak to my father, and it basically said, your account has been suspended due to sort of odd behavior.
Keep talking about microdosing over this platform.
Completely cut off all of my means of communication with my family. Yeah. And then a day later, I got the message, oops, that was an error. Sorry. But for that 24 hours,
it's terrifying.
I was out of touch.
And this comes back. We were talking about this before. I think maybe it was on the last episode. I'm trying to remember when, but we talked about Kashmir Hill trying to remove the big 5 from her life and how hard it is.
Right,
but
yes.
It's another point where if there's a major issue with one of these like large technologies that they've become part of the fabric of our just human activity is real pain. I mean, even just power, like if the power goes out, right? How do you get gas?
We tend to ignore a lot of this. Yeah. I mean, there are critical infrastructure systems that our lives depend on. I like the idea, and I'm not sure whether this is still current, but most people say with supply chains with food, any large city has really only got enough food for 3 days. So the supply chains break down.
What do you do?
You've got a really big problem.
Yeah, right. You got 3 days before everyone is no longer nice neighbors.
Yes.
But yeah, and I think that's the point with this is that with every technological change, whether it be AI, whether it be quantum computing, whether it be bioengineering, whatever, is that we need to be thinking about what these trade-offs are.
Yes.
Not that it becomes we should or we shouldn't, but to be aware.
We need to be aware of them.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I'm aware now. I'm reminded again more pointedly of like, make sure your stuff is updated before you're counting on all that. Otherwise, you find yourself in trouble.
Right. Yes.
So let's move on to his second point.
Okay. Right. How long have we got here?
We can talk. But, I mean, that's
the first hour. Point 1.
So the second point is that with all technological advances, there are winners and losers.
Yes.
Right. So technological change does not impact everyone equally. I'll throw out another attempt here. The classic William Gibson, right? The future is here. It's just not equally distributed.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so you can parse that any way you want, right? Yep. Which the dystopia is here. It's just not equally distributed.
Which I think is a really important framing of it.
Yeah.
Yes.
That, some groups with all these waves of innovation or change that some groups or individuals or, even countries or societies benefit greatly, while others are either disadvantaged or completely left behind.
Right, yes.
And that it's that uneven distribution gains and losses that has a fundamental aspect of technological progress.
Yes. And I think this is an intriguing one and a really tricky one.
Yeah.
Because if you're approaching this from the view that you want everybody to thrive in society, it feels anathema to say that some people aren't going to benefit.
Yeah.
But I also think it needs framing in the right sort of way, including asking, does a technology actively make some people's lives worse than they are at the moment, as well as elevating other people? Or is it just that it makes some people's lives better? And then the second question is, how fast does that diffuse through society? Or does it actually wrench apart society so you are definitely pushing people more towards dystopia in their local communities? And I think having those conversations is critical, because I think you can validly argue that if you have a technology that doesn't necessarily make some people's lives worse, but it makes some people's lives immeasurably better, there's a moral argument against doing that, because you are improving people's lives, as long as you're always thinking about how do those benefits spread through society rather than just be retained by a small elite.
Yeah. I mean, if you're left standing still while everyone else surpasses you, I mean, you've essentially just gone backwards. Right. And I think, if we look at something like AI, for example, and all, if we look at the frame today, right, with all the talk right now that it is, and you hear this sort of rhetoric kind of echoing around everywhere of AI is not going to take your job. It's the person who uses AI and all these kind of things. But again, if we look at this sort of transformation, the threat that is out there is that, those who have will prosper. And if you don't, you will be left behind. Now, the question is, like, to what extent, how long does that take?
Right. Yes.
And I mean, again, when we think about, if you look at technology or media, or even innovation, there's a natural cycle of diffusion.
See, that's right.
A well-known and well-studied.
And this to me comes down to, how is the technology being used? I think sort of the opening comment is absolutely right, that there's always going to be an unevenness. You cannot. Nothing works. Even going back to basic physics, there is always going to be unevenness unless you're going to accept heat death, which is where everything's the same, which we don't want.
We're all subject to entropy and
decay. But then the question is, where does the responsibility come for understanding the nature of that unevenness and making sure that it's not uneven where it shouldn't be, and where it's okay to have some unevenness because it actually drives things. So as an example, if you look at the deployment of artificial intelligence in decision-making, whether that's in businesses or in government even. Is it appropriate to have an unevenness where some people's jobs are being removed from them, they're being fired by artificial intelligence just because somebody has the ability to deploy a very powerful but very flawed AI system? Probably not. That's not the sort of unevenness we want.
No, exactly. And I think, and historically, right, this is, if you look at any age of innovation, even going back to the Industrial Revolution cycles, right? The same thing, right? You see, typically the global north having periods of time of massive advantage over the rest of the world. But ultimately, if you think about something like the digital or the information age, right? Of course, same thing. It
back
was
to the information superhighway, whatever it was. Yes,
but and you can see, right? Like, there was initially, of course, this massive advantage of the global north. So think United States, Western Europe, this kind of stuff. But it wasn't. The true power of that technology did not really come online. See what I did there?
Yep.
I need acknowledgement of my puns. But it wasn't really transformational until the rest of the world caught up.
Right. Yes.
Right.
Yes,
and that's when you start to see these massive increases in what we can do, because now that technology has, for more or less, there's still going to be pockets, of course, but for more or less, it has become ubiquitous and has allowed for that transfer of information, of knowledge, of new ideas. But during that time, there was massive amounts of disadvantage. Still is, right? Still are.
But this is where I think we need nuance in these conversations.
Absolutely.
Again, because those sort of technology gradients aren't necessarily bad. It's how we think about them, how we understand how they potentially improve lives or do not improve lives, and how we actually navigate them. But there are always going to be those differentials.
Yep. And I think, again, I think there's going to be a commonality to these 5 pieces, is that these aren't things that make you go, there's a threshold to check to see whether this is good or bad.
Yeah.
It's that, no, it doesn't matter what the technology is or the end result, wherever you classify the start and the end, there's winners and losers.
Right.
Like it's going to be that way. That's a natural part of, and to be fair, you also, if you're the group, the individual, the society that's pushing one of these advancements, there's an argument to me that you deserve to have some period of winning for doing it, right? I don't know.
That's a controversial take.
But the question is, what is that?
Yes, yeah.
Is that a short-term thing? Is it just the credit? Is it financial?
Is it? You think about this in sort of market economy terms, in a business.
Yeah.
As a business, you've got a fiduciary responsibility to be a winner.
Yeah, to make money.
If you set out to lose money, you should not be in business. But there are ethical and responsible ways of doing that, and there are deeply irresponsible ways of doing it.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Which I think brings us into the third category here. Embedded biases.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. Oh, this is getting controversial. Is this going to get us canceled?
Yeah, I hope not.
Right.
It's been a good run.
Right.
Time to microdose some of that.
That AI, yes.
But again, when you think about this and you investigate it, I think these are all like, oh yes, of course, right? Embedded biases, right? So every technology carries with it a set of underlying assumptions and values. I've given talks entitled like the mirror and things like that. That these, technologies, when they are created, you can, if you kind of reduce it down more philosophically, every technology is essentially a mirror to the society who created it, right?
Yes.
These are human created.
Right, yes.
Maybe with AI, maybe in the future we'll get to some creations that break away from this. I don't know.
Yeah. You're just going to have a different set of biases. But no, this is so important.
Yeah.
And the embeddedness and that fact that we build things in a way that reflects us. So you can think in very, very simple terms. If you are a person of a certain build and you're making something for you, the thing that you make is going to reflect your physicality, who you are as a person, which means that if somebody else who is not like you tries to use it, they're going to have problems.
Yeah.
And it's a very, very simplistic metaphor, but it happens with every technology we build.
Yep.
We build it according to how we see the world and how we interact with the world. And if that isn't how other people interact with the world or engage with it, you've got that embedded bias.
Yep. And now you have this problem. And I think that's one of the points that, again, was made, I think, very, very clearly back 27 years ago, is this idea of like those biases that are baked into these technologies can shape how we think, behave,
absolutely,
communicate, organize.
They have profound impacts.
Yes. And often I feel like that is, and I will say I do appreciate with the age of AI that we're in, how quickly this flag was raised.
Right.
The alarms were going off very quickly, which I appreciate, because I think a lot of times, looking historically, that those biases don't really come out until there's more sense of damage.
I think you're right. And there are so many cases where this has been unintentional. Well-meaning people have done things without fully understanding what the consequences are. So a perfect example, which I suspect you are heading towards, is early sort of facial recognition with computers, where the people making these systems were using databases predominantly full of white people.
Yep, they look like me. White male,
that's right.
And male too, right? Specifically.
So then when these systems either didn't work with people of color, or in the worst possible cases, there was that classic case where it's starting to categorize photos of people of color as gorillas.
Yeah.
Which is an awful thing.
Horrific.
But I can't imagine that was ever intentional. It was somebody just not understanding the embedded biases that they were putting in their systems.
Yep.
And the good thing is, as soon as you recognize those, you can course correct.
That's it. And I think that's that is the quintessential part of this, of why I think that these biases, again, I don't think there's any possible way you could develop something, invent something, create a new technology that doesn't have biases baked in.
Right.
I don't correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you could do that.
I don't think you can, because we're humans with limited brains and limited understanding.
That's right. But the power here and the caution is just know that going in, so that you can seek out different perspectives, different use cases. I mean, even just, this is where even just data nerds must get excited where it's like, all right, let's try it with this one. Let's try it with that one and see if it still works.
Right. Yes.
Because if I were to create some, like a widget that I need that suits a need, I'm going to build it exactly how I need it.
That's it. Yes,
right. I wouldn't think about, Andrew, how you need it, or I wouldn't think about how someone else needs it until you intentionally go, I wonder how someone else would use this.
Right.
But understanding that no matter how, I think, excited or proud or
so that's the point where intentionality becomes critical.
Yeah.
And I can tell you here, the thing that scares me the most is if we have a philosophy that even talking about embedded bias is wrong, it means we're intentionally closing our eyes to the possibility that we're building things that are going to disadvantage other people.
Yeah. And we don't want to be there.
No.
Because I think that's exactly it, is that understanding that whether you're the creator or you're the user of these technologies, that it's going to have, you can lump them into things like, you can say whatever its affordances and its constraints and these kind of ways of talking about it. But it's the same idea of, even as the user, so we talk about this with AI all the time, right? Which is, if you're trying to use this to investigate, like create images, right? I mean, there's a lot of examples. Even Google will do this, or used to. I think they've put their own thumb on the scale. If you just Googled pictures of doctors, right? All white males, or predominantly white males, but certainly all male, right?
Yep.
Or what's a computer programmer look like? Same, you're getting the same demographic. And again, you're like, is that a realistic reflection of the world? No.
Right, but this is actually where it gets complex, because I ran this experiment with Sora, which is OpenAI's video generator.
Oh, that's right. I remember this now. Yes.
I was asking it to create videos of lecturers, and within
like university, like professor type lectures.
With a couple of exceptions, they were all guys, all sort of in sort of sports jackets, many of them sort of having beards, all white, and
wearing a jacket with
I know, and I so
I'm just missing the elbow patches.
I wrote about this, and I actually have pushback with people saying, well, that's reality. University professors are typically sort of white guys with beards. So then the question comes up, do we have a responsibility to propagate something which is actually probably, in fact, definitely inappropriate? Or with our technologies, do we have a responsibility to reflect the world as we think it should be rather than as it is?
Yeah.
And I would say there is a responsibility to reflect the world as we would like it to be.
Yeah, you raise a really good point there. And I forget I don't have the details in front of me, but I remember it because I feel like it was Google, their image generator. They got in some hot water originally, right? So to counteract, again, the same biases of, because
they had historic figures coming out with sort of every possible race and color. Yes.
Right. And then, of course, the pushback. So originally the issue was, you say, show me a leader or something. And it was, again, the same kind of thing. It was all skewing white male. And then at one point it was like, they made an intentional change to, again, maybe do that, right? Which is show the future as they think it should be. And of course, it was like everyone under the rainbow.
Right, yes.
It was like, show me a general, and it was like a woman or something, right? Yep. But then the amount of people lost their marbles over this. And also I'm like, none of this is real, guys. This is all fake anyway.
Right. But the bottom line is technology impacts how we think, how we interact with each other, how we imagine and envision the future, and how we actually start creating that future. And so there is a responsibility there. Technology is not neutral. It is never neutral.
Yep, that's a great point. I think I've used that point in so many talks where it's like no technology by any stretch is neutral. In fact, by definition, they're value laden. Right.
Yes.
Which is where these embedded biases come in.
Yeah.
All right, we're on a good roll here because this rolls.
What's number 4?
Okay, number 4. This is one I think you've heard. I think you probably heard me talk about. The last two, I think you will ring familiar. One. So, or I should say 1. 4.
Right. Yes.
Is this idea that technological change has an ecological impact?
Yes.
So technological change, I would say, technological change is not additive. It is ecological, meaning that every new technology that sort of comes in alters the entire cultural and environment or cultural technology, societal environment to which it's introduced.
Yep.
That once this is in there, you cannot separate it, or you cannot say this is education plus the internet.
Right. Yes.
It's this is education within the age of internet. It's embedded.
It's a
in
complex
the fabric.
system. You've got to look at it through a systemic or systems lens.
That's right.
Yes.
And I think the analogy that's used in the actual speech is something about like putting dye in water, right? Like once you introduce it, it disperses through the whole volume.
And you can't sort of reverse that.
I mean, maybe there's a chemical way.
It's entropy in action, right? It's basically the laws of thermodynamics.
Yeah.
Sort of once it's in, you can't just reverse the clock.
You can't just reverse it, right?
Yep.
But I think for me, this is one of the pieces that I tend to leverage and talk a lot about, especially through the lens of something, in with AI, with education, with all these things that have predefined sort of their own ecologies.
Yes.
And now we're adding a new player into them.
Yeah.
And it's a fallacy to think that, oh, well, we can just, and this is, I think, an argument we've made before, and I've made it just recently with a provocation to some colleagues the other day. I'm like, moving forward, you will not be able to remove AI tools from your students' grasp.
Yes.
Like, not only that, you'll not even be able to, like, you yourself won't even be able to interact digitally with tools and platforms without being influenced by these tools.
So this to me is so important, because I think a lot of people think that this is an option. We can sort of adopt a technology or we can extract it.
Yeah.
But as you've just described it, it's the equivalent of saying, I'm 60 this year. I've decided I don't like that. I'm going to go back to being 50. Or maybe even 30. We're stuck in time. Time always goes forward, and technology always goes forward. With probably incredibly fewer exceptions, you can't just pull it back out of the system. You've got to work with the system with it in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking, like, is there an example of one? I was trying to think if I could think of an example where one's been extracted back out. And again, I would say it's ecological. So while it can't be extracted, potentially there could be such a strong pushback that something else is introduced that over time.
Right. And I think you can sequester. So again, I've got to say this using this metaphor of ecology, because I know we're going to have ecologists who are tearing their hair out, because I know ecologists hate it when people sort of take what is true ecology, looking at environmental systems, and apply it to other areas. But actually is a metaphor that works. Yeah. But it means that you can think about it in certain ways. So you can certainly sequester things away. So you put a potentially toxic technology into society. There are ways, if you notice sort of those toxic interactions, those bad interactions, you can sequester it away, and you can control how it's used. So nuclear is a good example. Yep. Biological weapons or biological agents is another example. But you can't make them go away.
Right, they're still there, even if they're isolated.
Yep.
I mean, I think again, Postman, he talks a lot at the time in a lot of his career about the influences of like television and things like that. But same kind of idea. I mean, if you think now, like today, you think about the role, go back as far as you can. So for some people that might be 5 years, for others it's 30 years or 40, but thinking about the role and even just yourself, like what is your relationship with something like TV? Right. And I mean TV is the broad sense. I don't watch television. Again, more air quotes. I don't watch television the way I used to when I was a kid. It's totally different. But still, this idea of how does that change the way we interact, we entertain? How does it color the way we think about things? Yeah.
Quite profoundly is the answer, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of the idea. Is like it's out there. It's it's part of the entire ecology of this society now.
It is. And there are always consequences. So even if you sort of take a step back from that technology. So I had periods when I was pretty young where my parents, I think I might have talked about this, decided that TV is a bad influence. So we didn't have a TV in the house. To this day, I regret not seeing whole series of Doctor Who, because I missed out on a cultural experience that should have been part of my youth.
I know, and now you have to, like watch it on YouTube or something.
Some of those Tom Baker years,
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, sadly, my this is a complete tangent. My first my real exposure to Doctor Who wasn't until the complete reboot with Christopher Eccleston. Was that how you say his name?
It was Christopher Eccleston.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
But I was hooked from the second. I mean,
and they did a fantastic job. I must say, this is me getting old. This is not the reality of the series, but I would say went downhill after David Tennant. But they did a great job. But yeah, the classics are still part of who I am.
Yeah, I do have. There's a special. It's for the rebooted Doctor Who. It's David Tennant and Matt Smith. Those two are but David Tennant. But by far and large, my favorite Doctor.
Actually, I've got to throw this in, which actually does bring us back to the conversation, because certainly the Doctor Who that I grew up with, and to a certain extent the reboot, was laser focused on this idea of responsibility around technology and science and society.
Yeah.
How do you weave that line between what you can do, what you should do, and how do you deal with the consequences of missteps or intentionally bad actions? And it's actually part of my psyche.
Okay, so we're gonna let's mark this down.
Right,
we need to do it. We need to do a special episode on Doctor Who,
right?
But I think this is also very influential, and I mean that word like as much as possible, because so much of what influence. I mean, I think it'd be interesting to survey lots of people who end up in science and technology in these areas, to ask them things that influence them heavily. And for many people, it is science fiction.
Yes.
Whether it be from books, TV, movies, or all of it combined. But those are some of our earliest exposures to these big questions. Like, I mean, think of like Doctor Who or something, there's other sort of, similar type shows, but that's a great one where you have someone who's literally traveling through space and time who can bring up big questions about whether or not entire civilizations are destroyed or wiped off the map, and how but yet not losing your humanity when you're trying. Like, it's a really, that shows, I mean, it's a marvelous, it needs no endorsement from me, but I would say one of the fantastic things about the longevity of that show too, is it constantly brings, it uses these entertaining storytelling ways of bringing these big concepts and big ideas to the forefront.
Yes. Yeah. Very effectively.
Yeah. So it's ecological. You can't change it. So deal with it. But again, the point is, and again, with all of these things, the point is not, check, that makes it good, or check, that makes it bad. But this is what happens with technological changes, regardless of what they are. And the last one here is, again, now this one, if anyone's at home playing bingo with how many times does Sean say mythic, this is your chance to yell, stand up and shout bingo. Because that is, this idea of mythic status as sort of his last point with technological change, that over time, technologies tend to acquire a mythic quality, becoming seen as natural or inevitable in hindsight. So rather than this human-made artifact with specific origins and consequences, how do you say this? The mythologicization?
Is that a word?
I don't know. I'm going to make it up. The mythologicization can obscure...
Or mythologicalization.
Mythologicalize. Yeah, I like that better. Can obscure those, like, that critical examination. And you start to basically surrender control. Surrender these. So all these things, all these 4 points that led up to this, all offer a critical lens to say, yep, we get something, but we have a trade-off. We gain something, we lost something. Someone won, someone lost. There's embedded biases we need to be careful of. It's in the system. We can't change that. It's part of the ecology. But then comes this mythic status. And this is the thing that I've been very vocal about with AI, is resisting this, is giving into a technology and assuming it is great because it exists, and to no longer employ those lenses of critical thinking with it.
And this ties in obviously with the idea of technological determinism, that technology effectively sort of has a life of its own, and we just accept it and we adjust our lives to it. Basically abdicating responsibility.
Exactly. And just saying, well, it's there's nothing we can do about it. And this is for me where I get into, like, for me, this is the on-ramp to those existential scenarios.
This is probably not a good place to begin to end the conversation. I mean, just as you get really hot under the collar.
I'm saying this is how you get RoboCop, right? Who is like, citizen, you are, like, I'm just, jaywalking.
Or again, where you get AI systems that are deciding who should be employed and who shouldn't and who should be fired.
Exactly.
And you just sort of say, well, it's inevitable. It's AI.
It's the AI is super, it's super, I don't want to say intelligent or whatever, but it knows better. It knows, or there's nothing we can do about it.
There's nothing we can do about it because this was going to happen.
That's it. Yeah. And that is, I think if nothing else, I would say this episode serves as a call to action to resist that mythicalization.
I don't even go there. Yes.
Resist the mythic quality of technologies, that these are all human made.
Yes.
They are all things that have an original origin and have demonstrated points along its trajectory that I think are not only fair game for critical analysis in those other elements, but also as a responsibility to always be always be revisiting that to decide just because it was that way last year, doesn't mean it needs to be. We can, God, this is like the show of Sean's butchered quotes. But I feel like it was what I'm trying to go for is the Steve Jobs quote that talks about the world is made up by people who are no smarter than you and I. And that if you want to change the world, you can do that. You can change it. And so
everybody has that power and that potential.
That we don't have to just settle for what is. If it can be better or we need something new. But to fall victim to that idea of the mythic nature of technology.
That's right. And just taking sort of that idea of myths a step further, and I'm just sort of repeating what you just said, but there is this myth that you can't change anything because you're not smart enough, you're not connected enough, you haven't got enough education, et cetera, et cetera. It is a myth.
Yeah.
I think everybody has the ability, not necessarily on their own, but as part of a community, to have a voice that says where technology goes, what it looks like, what we do with it, what we don't do with it, and how we aspire to develop the technology we want to build the sort of future we want.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great place because also it transitions into, if only there was a place at a major university that asked these kind of questions.
Yeah, you might call it the Future of Being Human initiative.
Exactly. But and that's, shameless, selfless, self-plug promotion, fine. But also, this is part of the work that we do, and part of this podcast is sharing this exact kind of thing, that this is information that everyone, I hope, can kind of take and learn from and internalize how they view the world and start asking those questions. And if you want like reference or other questions to ask, or to look how other people are thinking, talking, writing about these big questions, Future of Being Human is a wonderful place to go and get that information. Again, you've got our podcast, the YouTube channel, the Substack. All the things are connected through the Future. futurebeinghuman.asu.edu. Everything links in there. Yeah, and now we've made it to the end. I will also revisit the plug. Please do get in touch. Again, if you can leave us a review and a rating, that would be fantastic. But if you have ideas or comments or things like that, we've listed a bunch of ways you can get to us through Apple Podcasts, YouTube. If you want to go back in time, dig out that old email. You can actually do that. Yes. Get out that old email. Type away. Find us on LinkedIn. Find us on the Future of Being Human website.
Be part of the conversation. And ultimately, I think, carry on listening, carry on talking, take these conversations into your own lives and make them part and parcel of how you think about the future and technology.
Absolutely. I think one of the best things that someone had said to me about our show was they love listening to it and taking it into their staff meeting. And they throw this out as like, well, what are we going to do about this? That's phenomenal. That's what it is. Just the fact that we're stimulating conversations all over the place is fantastic. Amazing. Well, thank you for joining us today on Modem Futura. And Andrew, this is always a pleasure.
It is.
We made up some words. We
we butchered some words.
Butchered some things.
Maybe we said one or two things that are interesting.
I hope so.
Yep. So I guess until next time.
Yeah, we'll see you then.
Demodulating signal.
Modem Futura is a production of the Future of Being Human initiative at Arizona State University. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. To learn more about the Future of Being Human initiative and all of our other projects, please visit us on the web at futureofbeinghuman.asu.edu.
End translation.